Hello, 'tis I, Snacks, here to read to you the Chaldean oracles, because this book confirms, I think, all of what I've learned on my own scientifically as far as my study into what I consider the Semitic sciences of astrology and all that happens because of it. That science, or modern science anyhow, doesn't like to acknowledge, that doesn't like to validate, even though all Abrahamic religions and faiths collapse without first the truth of the Chaldeans and their wisdom in astrology being valid and accurate. Because in case you didn't know, the three wise men who found Jesus Christ were magi's of the Zoroastrian faith, within the Chaldean circle. So they were, informed that their savior, Messiah, would be shown up at X time when this, that, and that happened astrologically. And so that's how they knew to find Christ. But anyhow, this first video is just an introduction to the Chaldean oracles, a collection of Chaldean oracles translated by Thomas Taylor, who was an Englishman. Which is cool. Nothing against the English. I'm 60% on English. Just chill. Even though my family came here from Ireland because I think they're trying to escape imperialism. But that's whatever, because the Romans were nerds. But anyhow, we're going to start off with just the introduction, and then I'll go into an explanation of the Chaldean dogma, written by Cellus, who was a earlier kind of like metaphysician, I think in like Italy. Could be wrong on that. I don't really know too much about Cellus. I just know that he was interesting. Introduction. The following remains of Chaldean theology are not only venerable for their antiquity, but inestimably valuable for the unequaled sublimity of the doctrines they contain. They will doubtless, too, be held in the highest estimation by every liberal mind when it is considered that some of them are the sources whence the sublime conceptions of Plato flowed, that others are perfectly comfortable to his most obtuse dogmas, and that the most important part of them was corrupted by the Gnostics, and in this polluted state became the fountains of barbarous and gigantically daring impiety. Now, Thomas Taylor probably said this because he believed heavily in the divine nature of Jesus Christ, which I don't believe in. He was a man, certainly he was of the Christ, he had the knowledge of God, he had the wisdom of God, and he had the logic of God behind his word, but that does not mean that Jesus was God. He was a man, because there is no other God outside of the one God. Everything else is beneath that. That they are Chaldaic origin and were not forged by Christians of any denominations, as has been assessed by some superficial writers and demonstrably evident from the following considerations. In the first place, John Pisius, Earl of Mirandula, in a letter to Ficinius, informs him that he was in possession of the oracles of Zoroaster in the Chaldean tongue, with a commentary on them by certain Chaldean wise men, and that he did not speak this from mere conjecture, as Fabricius thinks he did, is evident from his expressly asserting in a letter to Urbinatus, page 256 of his works, that after much labor he had at length learned the Chaldean language, and still farther, as we shall see, he has inserted in his works 15 conclusions, founded on this very Chaldean manuscript. That this circumstance should have escaped the notice of mere Burbalus, and is not surprising, but it is singular that it should not have been attended to by a man of such uncommon erudition and extensive reading as Fabricius. So I imagine that, like, with a name like Fabricius, there's some level of the word fabricate involved with that. So I think Fabricius probably just went around saying everybody fabricated everything, and that's probably where the word came from. John Picus, Earl of Mirandula, I believe is Pico. I know that Pico had this book. He was a 12th century dude who founded Christian Kabbalah on mysticism, and he wrote 900 theses on magic and the natural sciences that he had planned to go into Rome, the Vatican, and debate with the Catholic Church, similar to how Martin Luther with his 95 theses on the Catholic Church, Pico had 900 theses. I'm pretty sure that's the case. I could be wrong. I don't know. In the next place, as Porphyry, Iamblichus, and Proclus wrote large commentaries on these oracles, and are well known to have ranked amongst the greatest enemies of the Christian religion, there is not even poetical probability that men of such great learning and sagacity should have been duped by the shallow artifice of some heretical Christian knave, to which we may add the Porphyry, in his Life of Plotinus, expressly mentions that certain revelations ascribed to Zoroaster were circulated in his time by many Christians and heretics, who had abandoned the ancient philosophy, and that he showed by many arguments these revelations were spurious, from which it is evident that the oracles commented on by him, were not those forged by the heretics of this time. And so one of the nice, interesting things about Zoroaster is I believe heavily in the Zoroastrian faith, just because it is like a more pure form of just the Abrahamic God and faith in general. It was Cyrus the Great who was listed as the Messiah of the Jews for freeing them from Babylon during their exile period, and Cyrus was Zoroastrian by default because it was a religion that flourished in Persia, which is Cyrus the Great. After Cyrus's conquest is when Zoroastrianism kind of really started picking up steam. And, all you get is you have one God and you have an eternal battle of good and evil, and it's associated that good is of that one God, Aparamasta, is what they call good in Zoroastrianism. And you can find this in Christianity too, in the book and chapter and verse. I think it's Mark 10:18. Where some dude basically goes up to Jesus and calls him a good teacher, and Jesus is like, dude, knock it off, poser. I'm not good, only God above is good. So check your privilege, homie. And, that's not a verbatim quote that, Yeshu said, but, it's probably close enough to, like, the actual words. I'm not going to say it's verbatim, but it's definitely close. In the third place, Proclus, in his MS Scholia on the Cratylus of Plato, says that the oracles respecting the intelligible and intellectual orders were derived by theurgists, which I don't know what theurgist means. I just know that theo tends to be God or religion, and gist probably means people who pushed and studied and advanced religion is what I imagine. Under the reign of Marcus Antonius, it is clear, therefore, that the following oracles, which are collected from the writings of the Platonists, are of Chaldean and not of Christian origin. Not to mention that the dogmas they contain are totally dissonant from those of the Christian faith. So something interesting is that a lot of people believe that Abraham, when he was, him and Terah were called to travel from Ur of the Chaldees, as mentioned in Genesis 12. Ur of the Chaldees, they traveled up, and then he traveled down into Canaan, but a big part of that allegedly was Abraham was to teach and bring them the Semitic sciences of astrology, astronomy, and arithmetic, is what some people believe. It could make sense. I'm not going to say that it's not true. I can't speak for God. I don't know the ultimate way that God works out. I'm only, a humble servant of the one, is what I call myself. It is likewise evident that some of these oracles may with great confidence be ascribed to the Chaldean Zoroaster. This appears from the Chaldean manuscript of Ficus, in which those oracles were denominated Zoroastrian, which exist at present with the Scholia of Celis under the title of the Magic Oracles of Zoroaster. And so it's kind of like, just, is this general Chaldean knowledge, or is this explicitly like Zoroaster, which it's probably far less to do with Zoroaster. If I'm being completely honest, Zoroaster already had his whole thing, and one of his big things was he started traveling over into Indian territory, Hindustan, and found out that they're worshiping these things called devas, and he's like, dude, you guys are nuts, man. You gotta knock this out. And they're like, dude, back off. That's what they told Zoroaster. And then Zoroaster, went back into Persia and kind of like through that area and is like, listen, dudes, there's one God, and then these guys have these devas, man. You gotta ignore them. Pretend they don't exist. They're not God, because monotheism is the only real way. And even in like Sanskrit, Hindu philosophy and theology, they still have one that is above all. You can't get away from that one. It's in everything. It's literally in every number. Because every number can be multiplied by 1 to reach itself. In consequence of this, I have distributed these oracles into 4 parts. The first division, 1, denominate the oracles of Zoroaster. The second, oracles delivered by Theurgus under the reign of Marcus Antonius, because the oracles in this division relate to the intelligible and intellectual orders. The third division I call oracles which were either delivered by Theurgus under Marcus Antonius or by Zoroaster. Because the collection of Celis is far from being complete, as we shall see from the conclusions of Picus, and the oracles in this division do not immediately relate to the intelligible and intellectual orders. The fourth division contains a few oracles of uncertain or imperfect meaning, which I have thus denominated from not having the MSS in my possession from which they were collected. I imagine that's just like the original text. The learned reader will easily perceive that my labor in forming this collection must have been great, as I have accurately arranged each oracle under its proper head and have given the authors in places where each a few only accepted may be found. He will likewise find that I have added 50 Chaldean oracles and fragments of oracles to the collections of Patricius, and that I have given a far more correct edition of the text than that of Leclerc. Short notes are added by way of comment on the most obscure of these oracles, and the exposition of Celis is prefixed as containing the best account of the Chaldaic dogmas that can at present be obtained. Thomas Taylor, Manor Place, Walworth. Now, a few reasons that I feel very connected to this book, specifically the fact that it was translated by this dude, Thomas Taylor, is because there is a certain level of in Gnosticism. Thomas is considered to be the twin of Christ, or Jesus, Yeshu. And a lot of people don't really know what that means, because Yeshu had a brother, but it wasn't Thomas. It was some other dude named Judas. And honestly, Yeshu kept giving everybody new names, because that's how there's the given name and there's the revealed name, or there's this hidden name and the revealed name, or something like that, because Yeshu is the hidden name that there's no real translation for, but Christ is the revealed name, because there's direct translations from Greek, from everywhere, as the anointed and whatnot. But my middle name is Thomas, so I kind of take that name and any emphasis of it, Thomas Aquinas and people who are of that spiritual order. So my name is, of course, Lumber Thomas Snack. Which is definitely my real name. But the other one is Taylor, because my mom almost named me Taylor instead of Lumber. Written in Walworth. And then the next part of the introduction is a concise exposition of Chaldaic dogma by Celis. They assert that there are 7 corporal worlds, 1 Empyrean and the first, after this 3 ethereal, and then 3 material worlds. The last of which is said to be terrestrial and the hater of life. And this is the sublinary place, containing likewise in itself matter, which they call a profundity. They are of opinion that there is one principle of things, and this they celebrate as the one and the good. Like I said, exactly that. After this, they venerate a certain paternal profundity, because God the One, the Father, is often associated with masculine pronouns. I like to think of this as the distinction between Father Time and Mother Earth, And that's kind of where I stand on things. Consisting of 3 triads, but each triad contains Father, Power, and Intellect. After this is the intelligible Inix. Then the synoches, of which one is Empyrean, the other ethereal, and the third material, the teletarch, follow the synox. After these succeed infantil fathers, who are also called cosmogoi, or leaders of the world. Of these, the first is called once beyond, the second is Hecate, and the third is twice beyond. Yeah, it's just what it says. After those are the 3 Amilicti. And last of all, the Upezocus. They likewise venerate a fontal triad of faith, truth, and love, because everything religious comes in threes, you know. A big part of the Trinity of Christ is what I would call it, is the triplicity that is Logos, which is logic, Gnosis, which is knowledge, and Sophia, which is wisdom. With Sophia, you have the divine feminine. With, I think, Logos, you have the divine masculine, and with knowledge is the genderless, just understanding of knowledge. I think. I don't know. Does anybody really know any of this stuff, or are we all just grasping at straws? Where was I? They assert that there is a ruling sun from a solar fountain and an archangelic sun, that there is a fountain of sense, a fontal judgment, a thundering fountain, a dioptric fountain, and a fountain of characters, seated in unknown impressions, because so much in religion and Abrahamic faith is based in waters and waters and waters and waters. And even Enki, who is seen as the Sumerian, Mesopotamian, Urian creator god of humanity, he was the god of fresh waters. So there's always just something to do with waters and that. And again, that there are fontal summits of Apollo, Osiris, and Hermes. They likewise assert that there are material fountains of centers and elements, that there is a zone of dreams and a fontal soul. After the fountains, they say the principles succeed, for fountains are superior to principles. But of the vivific principles, the summit is called Hecate, the middle ruling soul, and the extremity ruling virtue. They have likewise zonic Hecate, such as the Chaldaic Tridotis, Kalmas, and Ekloustiki, but the Azonic gods, according to them, are Serapis, Bacchus, and the series of Osiris and of Apollo. So what we got, like the sun, death, partying, and I don't know Serapis. I imagine it's got something to do with seraphim and angelic divinity or light in general. These gods are called Azonic because they rule without restraint over the zones and are established above the apparent gods. But the zonic gods are those which revolve around the celestial zones and rule over sublunary affairs, but not with the same unrestrained energy as the Azonic. For the Chaldeans consider the zonic order as divine, as distributing the parts of the sensible world, and as begirding the allotments about the material region. The ineratic circle succeeds the zones and comprehends the 7 spheres in which the stars are placed. According to them, likewise, there are 2 solar worlds, one which is subservient to the ethereal profundity, the other zonaic, being one of the 7 spheres. Of human souls, they establish a twofold fontal cause, viz. The paternal intellect and the fontal soul, and they consider partial souls as proceeding from the fontal according to the will of the Father. Souls of this kind, however, possess a self-begotten and self-vital essence, for they are not like altermotive natures. Indeed, since according to the oracle, a partial soul is a portion of divine fire, that is the divine spark that Gnostics believe in, that the demiurge pulled from the pleroma and trapped within our physical bodies so that we may suffer for eternity and be slaves. Pretty much. A splendid fire and a paternal conception. It must be an immaterial and self-subsisting essence, for everything divine is of this kind, and of this soul is a portion. They assert too that all things are contained in each soul, but that in each there is an unknown characteristic of ineffable and ineffable impression. They are of opinion that the soul often descends into the world through many causes, either through the deflection of its wings or through the paternal will. They believe the world to be eternal. As likewise the periods of the stars, they multifariously distribute Hades, at one time calling it the leader of a terrene allotment, and at another the sublunary region. Sometimes they denominate it the most inward of the ethereal and material worlds, at another irrational soul. In this they place the rational soul not essentially but according to habitude, when it sympathizes with it and energizes according to partial reason. Now, something specific about Hades and just general like underworld stuff, because everyone likes to get into that, is that Hades is the lord of the underworld in Greek mythology, which is going to be an influencer of Celis, I imagine. But I think that this earth just in general is the underworld because heaven exists above us, right? So everything under heaven would be the underworld. I think. I could be wrong, you know. Anyone could be wrong. I always state I could be wrong. They consider ideas at one time as the conceptions of the Father, at another time as universal reasons via physical, psychical, and intelligible, and again as the exempt hyperaxes or summits of beings. They assert that magical operations are accomplished through the intervention of the highest powers and terrene substances. So that's basically like, you know, through God and through the energy that exists, the MGE as I call it, you can cast magic, and a lot of it has to do with imbuing that spiritual, psychical energy or whatever with material from the physical land. That's why in, you know, the Picatrix and anything where you're going to be doing like talisman crafting, you know, there's always material products that go into the image crafting. They consider souls as restored after death to their pristine perfection in the wholes of the universe according to the measures of their peculiar purifications. But some souls are raised by them to a supermundane condition of being. They likewise define souls to be media between impartible and partible natures. With respect to these dogmas, many of them are adopted by Plato and Aristotle, but Plotinus, Porphyry, Iamblichus, Proclus, and their disciples adopt the whole of them and admit them without hesitation as doctrines of a divine origin. Thus far, Cellus, I add, for the sake of those readers that are unacquainted with the scientific theology of the ancients, that as the highest principle of things in a nature truly ineffable and unknown, it is impossible that this visible world could have been produced by him without media. And this not through any impotency, but on the contrary, through transcendency of power. For if he had produced all things without the agency of intermediate beings, all things must have been, like himself, ineffable and unknown. So basically what that means is, like, this should be obvious, because even if you follow the Gnostic canon of a demiurge, that just means builder, right? And so, like, you've got God, the one, the all, which is kind of like a general contractor, because I know construction terms. And then all things that were created under him would be kind of like leased out to subcontractors, otherwise they'd be unknown to us. He makes the unknown known as he wishes, so that the unknown can't be known, I think. I don't know. You kind of have to get into a lot of just understanding to be knowledgeable in this kind of study. They likewise define souls. I already said that one. I add, for the sake of those readers that are unacquainted with the transcendence, for if he had produced all things, it is necessary, therefore, that there should be certain mighty powers between the supreme principle of things and us. For we, in reality, are nothing more than the dredges of the universe. These mighty powers, from their surpassing similitude to the first God, were very properly called by the ancients gods, and were considered by them as perpetually subsisting in the most admirable and profound union with each other, and the first cause, yet so as amidst this union to preserve their own energy distinct from that of the highest God. For it would be absurd in the extreme to allow that man has a peculiar energy of his own, and to deny that this is the case with the most exalted beings. Hence, as Proclus beautifully observes, the gods may be compared to trees rooted in the earth, for as these, by their roots, are united with the earth, and become earthly in an eminent degree, without being earth itself. So the gods, by their summits, are profoundly united to the first cause, and by this means are transcendentally similar to, without being, the first cause. So basically, like, exactly what I said, God created everything, including the energies and frequencies that help facilitate the actions and the affairs of Earth, and because those exist, those don't diminish or detract from the one God. In fact, they strengthen the idea of the one God, in my opinion. Lines 2, emanating from the center of a circle, afford us a conspicuous image of the manner in which these mighty powers proceed from, and subsisted. The ineffable principle of things, for here the lines are evidently things different from the center, to which at the same time, by their summits, they're exquisitely allied. All these summits too, which are indescribably absorbed in center, are yet no parts, i.e. powers of it, for the center has a subsistence prior to them as being their cause. So, an important thing about that last little bit is that there is an absurd amount of all religion, all spirituality, and all logic, both mathematical, theological, psychological, that exists from just a circle and being able to cut it in half or find the exact center of that circle. It's kind of like the crux of all religion and everything is what you can do with the circle. Because, you know, in a circle, you get infinite amount of squares, but with each square inside a circle, you either get 2 right triangles or you get 4 perfect triangles. And so therefore, the ratio of triangles to squares is at least 3, maybe 4, depending on how you look at it. But that's going to wrap up the introductory part of the Chaldean oracles. Please stay tuned for part 1 or book 1 of this as I try to enlighten the world and help bring back some of the actual ancient sciences rather than just blind faith in a man who died for us. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe.